Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with an end of project video for this vintage radio controlled Armortek early production German Tiger 1. Since the last video update, the last of the model's detailing has been added and the tank is now fully completed. We'll be going over these additions to what brought the tank up to this state here in this video. Now this video is not going to contain a whole lot of test driving scenes of this model here, as all of those scenes are going to be on a whole video which is dedicated to just the tank driving around in its completed state. That video will be published shortly after this video here, so you might want to stay tuned for that one as well. For anyone who's stumbling into this video for the first time, this model here is a radio controlled 1/6 scale early production German Tiger 1 from the British company Armortek. This particular model was built for commission and belongs to a private collector. As I often mention in these commission build videos that I often do, I often take on commission build projects from vehicles ranging from 1/35 scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. In addition to that information, for anyone who's still a newcomer to this video, this particular model here has been the subject matter of a whole video playlist which follows this build all the way up from when I first started the project to the completed state that you see here. I strongly recommend pausing this video here and going back to the playlist, which the links are found in the video description. There you get a good idea on the amount of work as well as modifications and upgrades that went into this model in order to really bring it up to the completed state that you see here. Before we continue with the video, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around the model. While working on finishing up the last of the tank's crew equipment and pioneer tools, takes us to the gun cleaning staves. Now the Tiger 1 is distinctive in having 6 gun cleaning staves on each side of the turret. This design was developed on the early production Tiger and stayed throughout the Tiger 1's production life, in which the staves are then straddled by that of the main tow cables. Now for the Armortek kit, the staves that the kit originally supplied you with were comprised of the components that you see here. Now these are just a sample of them, and the kit did contain the total 6 that were required to assemble the tank. Now the staves on the original Armortek kits are the follows. You have this CNC'd steel 1/4 inch rod that is hollow on one end and has a little protruding peg on the other. They kind of fit together, but there's no locking whatsoever. These pieces here are very basic in their overall appearance and shape, and for this tank here will not be used. In their place, I went ahead and fabricated new gun cleaning staves out of wood and brass. These staves here are the exact same ones that have been found on my other 1/6 scale builds, whether it be an Armortek or one of my scratch built tanks. They're comprised of real wood dowel for the actual handles, and the connecting couple pieces are fabricated out of brass. They are also soldered together. The pieces are also fully functional in that you can thread them together. However, for this tank here, this will probably never be done, as once they are mounted to the side, they tend to stay in place. Now, on the last of the stave, there would be the swab and the bore brush for cleaning out that of the barrel. Now, for this one here, I went ahead and utilized a resin detail insert from Armortek. The Armortek piece is cast in resin and is a nicely detailed component. I had one of these pieces on hand, so I might as well just use it on this build. The piece was simply painted, weathered, and then mounted to my cleaning stave that I have here. Now, it is important to point out that these all-metal cleaning staves here are typically found on the first two releases of the Armortek Tiger 1s, which of course would be a mid-production and this early production unit. I believe also on their first generation late production tank, this design may have still been present, but I might be mistaken. As the more recent releases of the Armortek Tiger 1 kits replaced this design here with one that is much better in accuracy and quality. The newer generation units feature pre-cut wooden dowel rods and CNC'd brass end connectors for use for the tips found on the components. The tanks that are equipped with those components there, scratch building the new staves are simply not necessary and can be used out of box with no real mods needed. Moving on from the cleaning rods takes us to the jack. The jack here was the one that was mentioned in a previous video and is an aftermarket component. The piece was very nicely detailed and really no modifications were made to this component whatsoever. It was simply painted and weathered. Taking the opportunity now to show the weathering that went into this component just prior to the mounting it to the tank's mounts, which are found on the rear hull. Moving from the tank's tools takes us to the tracks themselves. The tracks were mentioned in the previous video, however, since that video was taken, the tank has been test driven. Once the tank is driven, you can see that the track is starting to have its wear start coming through. This is natural, and the more the tank is driven, the more the surfaces will become pronounced. As for the inside portion of the track, the inside portion gets weathered as well. As you see, there are these distinctive type of tire grooves which are made by the road wheels when the tank is in operation. This type of weathering is very difficult to replicate in smaller scales. However, it's one of those realistic features that just comes for the fact that the tank is fully radio controlled. Moving from the track takes us to the jack. The jack was mentioned in an earlier scene. However, now you can see it mounted to the model. Now, it's important to point out that if you notice, the jack has been mounted upside down. The reason for this is because of the way the FIFO canisters are found in this location here. I had difficulty with mounting this component right side up. The reason of which is because the base plate was making contact with the end cap here on the FIFO canister. Now, this isn't necessarily a mistake, as on the real jack here, or if this component was functional, a couple turns would open this component up, which would then give me the leeway to mount it in the more appropriate pattern, which is commonly seen. However, because the jack is non-functional, the only way to get it to fit was to mount it upside down. Now, it's important to point out that this isn't necessarily an inaccuracy, as these pieces can be mounted in any which way, but are just frequently more found with the component being right side up. Moving from the jack takes us to the starter plate. Starter plate was mentioned before, and here you can see it mounted to the rear of the vehicle. As you can see, being painted in a different color really helps it pop from the rest of the tank's detailing. Moving down from the starter plate takes us to the tow hitch pin. Tow hitch pin was also painted in the same manner as the starter plate for the same reason. The tow pin here is the resin one from the EastCoastArmory.com product line and was mentioned in an earlier video. Moving from the tow pin takes us to the FIFO canisters themselves. As you can see, the last detail that was added was that of the chain work. These FIFO canisters were unique with having all of these axis caps in order to clean out the sections where the particulate would accumulate. These, to prevent them from getting lost, chains were used on them and held them close by. The chains were mounted and were not originally part of the Armortek set. Once the chain work is added, it greatly helps the detailing of the final canisters compared to just leaving them stock, which is commonly done on most builds. Moving from the rear plate takes us to the left-hand side hull, which takes us directly to that of the track replacement cable. The Tiger 1 does feature a cable mounted on this side of the hull here, which was mentioned in an earlier video, and the purpose of this cable is to aid with the removal of the tracks. The cable itself is supplied with the Armortek kit. It's just that of a steel cable. However, what was added was that of the detail end pieces that we see here. These detail end pieces were originally, I believe, from 6-scale icons, and they were casted in the detail that you have here. The pieces were simply mounted to the metal cable, and then everything was painted and weathered. Now, what's unique about the early versions of the Tiger 1 was that the cable mounted on in these two locations over here. And I go into more detail about the mounts in a earlier video. However, you can see here that the cable is not directly connected to the cap, which is found mounted on the hull. The cable's connected to this strap mechanism here, and then this locks into the mounting cleat that we have here on the sides. This design changed on the later versions of the Tiger 1, which embodied more of that of a King Tiger type layout. And that information is also mentioned in another project video of a late production Tiger 1 in the same scale. Now, to clamp everything together, I have here small little clamps which are held on with wing nuts. This is as per the real vehicle, and the wing nuts that you see on this model here are actually a upgraded version which are found on the ECA product line. In the past, I used to use resin for these components. Standard resin does visually look nice. However, one problem with the wing nuts is that due to their small size and shape, they tend to be a little bit on the frail and fragile side and are easily broken. To address this, I went ahead and had the idea to swap out the material. Instead of using the standard resin that I use on my components, I went ahead and swapped it out for the flexible resin. The flex resin will budge and give if in case anything is snagged across the sides, as opposed to just straight up snapping as what would normally happen with the standard resin. Visually, the pieces look identical, and they do the same job in holding everything together. This is true for not only these larger wing nuts here that are on the side, but also for the top wing nuts that are located on the top deck. All wing nuts that are to be sold on the ECA product line from henceforth will be swapped out with that of the flexible resin units. Moving our way to the top deck, we can see here the staves and the tow cables have also been added. The staves were the same ones mentioned before and were simply mounted to the stave mounts, which were mentioned again in a previous video. As for the main tow cables, just like with the transport cables, these were supplied with the kit, and again were just this thick gauge of steel cabling. The end connectors we see here are also from 6-scale icons, and were simply painted and mounted to this steel cable. Now, it is important to point out that on the more recent renditions of this kit from Armortek, Armortek gives you the cables that are pre-cut and also have their detail end connectors already pre-pressed on. This is true for both the main cable as well as the transport cable. However, on these older first and maybe second generation Armortek Tigers, this is not the case, and they just supplied you again with a length of cable and some bits of hardware in order to assemble the end connecting eyelets. The problem is when comes time to actually the fabrication of these is that with the original cable that was supplied with the kit, it's such a strong gauge cable that trying to bend it and get it into the correct shape that we have here is very difficult. Which was why when 6CL Icons created these components, it really did help with the ease of building these. Moving from there takes us to the crowbar. This was simply mounted onto the mounts which were added in an earlier video. Moving from the main cable takes us to the final detailing, which was added to the S-mine launchers. What was added since the previous scenes was that of the firing wire as well as the terminal screw caps. The S-mines are fired remotely via a switch on the inside of the vehicle. And this is done electrically via this wire which emerges from the hull. It enters into the base of the S-mine mount via these little terminal screw caps. On the opposite side, a wire would emerge out and enter into the front portion of the mine once there is a canister loaded on the inside. Now, the wire and the terminal jacks are all included with the ECA set and were added after the tank was fully painted and weathered. And all of these details were added to all of the S-mines which are found on the tank's hull. Now, if you notice on this model here, the S-mines are represented in an unloaded state. If they were loaded, you would then need to have the extra wiring which would emerge from this side here and enter into the front portion of the S-mine. Moving on from the S-mines takes us to the rear engine hatch, and the last of the detailing that needs to have been added since the last scene was that of the 5-volt tubes themselves. These tubes were again mentioned in more detail in another video, and over here you can see that they've been painted, weathered, and mounted to the tank. This is also true for the straps as well. And here, with the turret rotated out of the way, we can get a good view of the front hatch area. Starting with the tools, the shovel, the axe, and the sledge have all been added. And on the driver's side here, we have the last of the detail which was needed to be added to the snorkeling air intake cover plate. What was added since the last scene was that of the mounting strap, as well as the wing nut and other fastener. As for the hatch has also been completed since the last time I mentioned it. What was added to the hatch was that of the periscope insert detailing. As for the periscope inserts, they are separately molded in metal and were painted and dropped into their appropriate locations. Now, one thing that's interesting about the 6-scale icon set is that on the original sets, there were prisms which were mounted into the section here for that of the periscope. And I believe the original 6-scale icons components actually had real periscopes mounted in them. However, when I was working on this set here, the prisms were absent, so new faux prisms were fabricated. They were added to both the interior and the exterior portion of the periscope. If you notice on the periscope here, the 6-scale icon set also has the rubber protector for that of the periscope. On the real German tank, what this component would do it would protect the periscope from being clunked around on the inside, but would also act as a headrest and give something soft for the crew member to rest his face on. This is present on the opposite side of the tank as well. The components were simply mounted to the 6-scale icon piece as per the original design of the kit and were problem-free. With the turret rotated to the other side, here we get a good view of the opposite side top deck detailing. Starting with the wire cutter. The wire cutter that you see here is the 6-scale icons piece, which was again mentioned in a previous video. However, to improve the component from the original, I went ahead and modified the handles. The original 6-scale icons component had the handles integrally molded into the cutter head, and the whole piece was one integral casting. However, on the real German tank, the handles were made out of wood, and to make things even more interesting, the Germans actually had Bakelite plastic knobs on the rear end portion of the cutter. On the model, I simply amputated the metal handles and replaced them with wooden dowel, which were the same diameter. The end pieces were recycled from the original one and were simply painted to resemble Bakelite and mounted to the rear portion here of the wooden dowel rods. This little modification greatly helps improve the accuracy of the piece as opposed to trying to replicate the wood coloring with the use of paints. Moving our way up to the front of the vehicle takes us to the muzzle protected bag. The bag that you see here was supplied by the customer with the kit, and I believe this one here was made by 6-scale icons. The bag itself is made of cloth and has a little bit of string, just like the real bag, to tie it around the barrel. And the purpose of this bag would obviously to be protecting that of the muzzle brake as well as the barrel itself of the gun. Now, this component here is no longer in production from 6-scale lock-ons. However, muzzle bags are offered by East Coast Armory and are found on the eastcoastarmory.com catalog. To remove it, you just simply undo the string, loosen it a little bit, and the piece will pop right off. While on the muzzle brake, I frequently mention in my videos that this is one component and a little bit of detailing that tends to be over-weathered by most model builders that post their builds online, as well as also in model shows. In actuality, the pieces don't really get that fouled up to the degree that I've seen in some of these builds. Some of the builds I've seen the carbon fouling go all the way up to the barrel. However, in actuality, they tend to just stay in this section here and in this amount. Moving our way to the rear portion of the tank takes us to the rear bin. Now, the rear bin is fully functional, as again was mentioned in a previous video. However, inside the bin is that of this rubber hose. The purpose of this rubber hose is for that of refueling of the smoke system. The smoke system, if we can recall, is refilled by the removal of this cap here. You simply unscrew this cap, and there goes your spigot for refilling of the smoke system. Now, of course, there is a onboard refueling pump, which is accessed through the radio operator's hatch. Again, more detail about this is found in previous videos. Also, important to point out that the smoke system can be refueled from either side of the fuel tank's cover caps. Both of these are centrally connected, and you can refuel the system from either one of these units. Now, as for a quick recap, this model here is a Armortek early production German Tiger 1. More specifically, this is the first generation Armortek Tiger 1, which was released back in 2004 and 2005 timeframe. These kits here were the second Tiger 1s that were released by the company, the first being that of a mid-production Tiger. This one here is an early production tank, which does feature several of the detail features that were found on the first generation kits. However, Armortek tooled up some early production features. Of course, all of this I described in past videos. Another interesting fact to point out is that of all of the releases that Armortek did of the Tiger 1, this was one of the only times where Armortek went ahead and released the Tiger 1 in its original early production format. The other Armortek re-releases have always either been mid or late production Tiger 1s. This was true up until 2015 when Armortek decided to re-release a early production Tiger 1. However, that vehicle does feature a lot more improved tooling compared to these two units that we have here on camera. As for the other vehicle that's behind the commission build, that Panther Gray Tiger 1 belongs in the ECA collection, and that model is actually the first Armortek tank that I ever built. That model and this tank here both come from the same production batch, and these two kits are actually sisters, which is why it's pretty interesting to have the two on camera together. Now, the all-gray Tiger 1 was finished back in 2006 and has been running and stayed in this condition ever since. There's no real need to upgrade it detail-wise any further. Now, having said that, there are a few details that are found on that model there, which are a lot more primitive compared to the type of detailing which is found on my more recent builds, namely like the Tiger S25, which is sitting directly next to it. It's also important to point out that the all-gray Tiger 1 features Armortek's first generation electronics and motion pack, while the S25 Tiger was upgraded with their most current generation electronic packages. Another interesting detail to point out is that almost all of my building tips and techniques that are frequently mentioned and illustrated in my build videos really all stem from my personal experiences with building that old Tiger 1 sitting over there. That vehicle there pretty much set the groundwork for all of the builds that came afterwards, including this vehicle sitting right over here. With the tank now complete, I could go ahead and take the tank for one more test drive, just prior to the customer picking it up and adding it to his own personal collection. And with that, that wraps up this end of project video for this vintage Armortek 1/6 scale radio-controlled early production German Tiger 1. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, where there are more photographs of not only this build that were posted since the project start, but also the other builds which are found on this YouTube channel. In addition to that, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks for watching.